So, what kind of pants did Mario wear?
I heard this joke.
Do you know?
No.
Denim.
That's pretty good.
You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 16. Subscribe to us and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app.
And visit us at codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussion, and much more.
Send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net and follow us on Twitter at codingblocks, or head to www.codingblocks.net and find our other social links at the top of the page. And with that, welcome to Coding Blocks. I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm Joe Zach.
And I'm Michael Outlaw.
And today we're going to be talking about some more design patterns. So we got a lot of good feedback on the last show, and we're finally coming back to it. And today we're going to be focusing on just a couple of the behavioral patterns, because there's like teens of them, maybe even 20.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So we each picked one to talk about, and we're excited about it.
Yep. So first, though, let's get started with some podcasting news. What we got over here? I think this is your favorite one, Jay-Z.
Yeah, I want this one. I want to say it. Pumpkin Spice Latte is back.
Where's this?
What? It's Starbucks, Joe. We've got some international listeners, so I feel for you if this isn't available to you. But
for them, it's at Le Starbucks.
Yeah, man, it's like $5.25 for a little drink of heaven.
I don't know though. Pumpkin, anything like that doesn't sound good to me.
It's not really pumpkin.
This man's addicted to pumpkin everything, though. He used to have pumpkin creamer.
Oh yeah. It's so good.
All right. We also got some feedback from Patrick on Independ, and we have a whole list of things here. So it was Patrick Smakia responded to our gripes, which, I mean, he actually took the time. He took the time to respond to each one of them. So one of them was like attaching to the solution had benefits. What was I forget exactly how he put that.
Yeah, it let him do different things to different projects and different kind of views, and you could detach it too.
Well, yeah, okay. So not only did he mention the detaching, which I don't know, in all fairness, if we had mentioned, but like one of the things specifically that he said was a benefit to doing it the way he was that you could specifically say these are the assemblies that I want Independ to track, to monitor.
Oh, okay, yeah,
right.
All right.
So there were a lot of great things that he had in there. Like, my favorite was he sent us an early screenshot of the dark theme being honored in Visual Studio.
That's awesome.
So
yeah. I think that was Michael's biggie.
Oh my God, I'm gonna be so happy to see that one.
Yeah, and he actually wrote us and sent some screenshots and was like, is this what you guys are talking about with the column headers that Alan had been talking about? So he really took the advice and suggestions to heart, which is really cool. And he just seems like a really nice and honest guy.
I think that was one of the most interesting things about the whole thing was like, the few, like, they weren't even, like, you called them gripes just a moment ago. But,
yeah, I mean, they weren't.
Like,
they were
Like,
nitpicks. They were nitpicks.
They weren't horrible things, none of them. But yeah, like you said, Joe, he actually took the time to respond back to all of them and had answers back to all of them. So it was that was really impressive.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would take even nitpicks so kindly. So kudos to him.
Yeah, I mean he handled it like a champ. And I will say he said that he had no answer for me with the you need multiple monitors. But I thought about this. There's an answer. The new LG UM. 34 UM 95
wides.
No, not the 20, not the 20.
I said ultra wides.
Yes, the 34-inch ultra wide. Oh my God, I want that thing. We'll leave a link in the show notes. It's literally heaven in a monitor.
What? It sounds like the trailer park version of a monitor. There, it's the ultra wide.
That's so wrong.
The
tornado's gonna hit it.
My buddy John, he just got a MacBook Air, 11-inch, and he's got one of these ultra wide monitors. And he took a picture next to the other. I'll write him and see if I can post this picture because it's ridiculous. It makes the laptop look like a phone.
Man, I actually want two of them. I know that's a little obscene, but
that sounds fantastic.
Oh my God, could you imagine? Jeez. Yeah. Anyways, but
talk about your first world problems.
Yeah, seriously, completely. What else we got?
So we attended the Internet of Things Signal R meetup. That was interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with Signal R, but it's an API that allows you to do real-time communication back and forth between the client and the server.
Right, and so it uses like WebSockets if that's available. If not, it kind of falls back to the next best thing and so forth.
Yeah, it has huge backwards compatibility support built into it as well across multiple different operating systems. And it was interesting to see the presentation and their use for it, where they were using it to talk to multiple devices. Each device was a different type of, like one of them was a Raspberry Pi, one of them was the Galileo board, I think is the name of it. The Adreno was another one. I can't remember all of them, but
and then all the sensor. I mean, yeah, the sensors were a big part of it too. But it's a lot of kind of what we talked about in episode 12. What do you want to be when you grow up? And that for me is kind of the dream of like getting back to like the real world.
Yeah, I mean it was all doing like real time communication using SignalR in it, and they showed examples of the same code being used in oh my god, what was it? There was a Windows Phone app. There was a Windows Store app. There was a Xamarin app for Android.
iPhone too.
Yeah, there was a web app for it. It was fantastic.
Yeah, he's using teller controls too, which I haven't really seen a lot of, but they looked really nice.
The interesting thing is, when I've heard SignalR before, I always just associate it with real-time chat. Mm-hmm. And it was nice because I didn't get to go to the thing with you guys, but it was nice to come back and hear that you were talking about, oh, no, they're doing things in like elevators and they're monitoring parts and what's going on. And so like literally you have this one data hub now that's talking to all these devices, and you have dashboards and all that. So that was really cool. I wish I had gone.
Yep. Speaking of really cool, last time we went to this event, we mentioned it, the Build Guild Atlanta. I think most of the time we spent talking about was about the French fries that we had at this venue, which I am looking very much forward to. So that's coming up on the September 11th if you're in the Atlanta region. September 8th. It's awesome. It's this place, Joystick. It's a bar and arcade, and people talking about code all night. Count me in.
Old school arcade.
Yeah, I'm absolutely going to try and make it to that one. I may or may not be able to, but the next thing that we got are like reviews. Guys,
oh my god, you guys are awesome.
This has been fantastic. Like we actually kind of, I don't want to say flooded, but we got hit with several reviews over the past month. And unfortunately, we hadn't gotten another episode out because we've all been insanely busy. But here we are. We got...
Oh, my God, back to school.
And so we're not going to read them all this time because, people took the time to write some really nice reviews. But like some of the headings we got from Hyperspatial, who can be found at Twitter at Hyperspatial, SPACIAL. Awesome podcast for developers. Another one, Icons. Awesome podcast. Mike Lahr, mind-blowing.
Do you think there's any relation to SignalR?
Possibly. Huh. Then we also those were reviews on Stitcher, which we really appreciate. Those don't usually seem to grow as fast. iTunes we got from Cash CHW, Solid Information. Another one, Jason Young from Ytechie, one of a kind. So guys, we really appreciate it. Please do leave your feedback, any comments or anything that you have. Leave it in iTunes, leave it in Stitcher, wherever you listen to this. Just so that, you can help spread the word. And it really does help keep us motivated to keep moving with these things. So really, really appreciate it. I know it takes time to do these things, and it's, time that you're usually not, you're not listening to this podcast while you're sitting at your computer most of the time. So we really do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do that.
And just know that it's going to a good place, too, because not only are you helping us feel like this is worthwhile and that we're doing something that you enjoy, but it's also helping others find us as well, which helps to grow the audience too.
Oh, I thought the good place was straight to my head.
Oh, yeah. Well, you guys can't see the side of Joe's head anymore, but it's pretty big.
Yeah, it's vast.
Yeah, it's catching up to my belly now.
That's one of the things we all struggle at, sitting in front of computers all day.
Right.
Another piece of news, and this kind of hurt me a little bit, it upset me a little, was Yahoo user interface is basically saying they're done. They're not going to support this anymore. They're done doing any new development, and pretty much it'll just sit out there, and nothing else is going to happen.
It hurt you?
It hurt me. So, back in the days when you didn't really have a lot of options for having nice JavaScript libraries, YUI was one of the most advanced at the time. It was kind of up there with GWT and those. And actually EXTJS, which you may or may not know, which was purchased by Sencha, which is probably one of the most popular API libraries for having widgets and whatnot, it started from YUI, and there were probably several others that did as well. But they basically called it quits. They said things are moving in a
This guy
different.
is JavaScript.
They're moving in a different direction, so that one's done.
And I remember why I always had the best documentation, so there's always a place in my heart for them.
Oh, they did. They had tons of documentation. It was fantastic.
Now you can use Dojo and have like 10,000 files added to your project.
Yeah,
Right.
Outlaw was a little upset when he found out that there were, what was it, 10,100
Yeah,
some
it
odd
was
files.
over 10,000 files. I was like, good Lord.
In just the standard Dojo download. So, anyways, yeah, it's a little monstrous. And then the last thing. So, if you guys listen to episodes 14 and 15, is that correct? Yeah, 14 and 15, where we talked about SQL pretty much ad nauseum. After that, I went ahead and created a couple of YouTube videos that we now have a channel for. So, if you go to www.youtube.com/codingblocks, you'll find the 2 videos. So, if you want to learn about all the different types of SQL joins, the first 2 videos are up there. And we're going to start putting more of this stuff up there too. So if we're talking about like design patterns, I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of these show up there as well. So
yeah, feel free to comment on those too.
yeah, go up there, subscribe
Discuss
to the YouTube
values
channel.
of propane.
Hey, he's up off me.
Yeah, if you guys get that, then kudos.
and if you don't, go check out the videos and then you will.
No, it wasn't that. It was on my other site. It happened on my headphone review site. So yeah, it's not fun. Anyways, so yeah, definitely go check that out. And we're also going to be adding a link to the top of our codingblocks.net page so you can quickly get to our YouTube channel. So check that out.
Yeah, and Alan actually said that was the last thing, but there are 2 more I kind of had snuck on there.
Oh, my bad.
I wanted to mention Atlanta Code Camp's coming up. I know we keep talking about regional stuff, which is very cool, but Code Camps actually happen all over the world. I don't really know if it's a Microsoft thing or if they're just a big sponsor of it, but it's a really cool event. I think it costs $10. It's like a full day conference. It's Saturday. They provide lunch. It's freaking awesome. Some big name speakers, some really awesome topics, and it's just a whole bunch of nerds hanging out. So definitely, if you're not in the Atlanta region, then I would look for a Code Camp near you and definitely check it out. Awesome.
And that's the last thing for the. Oh wait,
No,
you had
no,
one more,
yeah,
and this
one
one's a good one. So Lee Inglestone, or I think we referred to him last time as Linglestone, but he had a great tweet. I just wanted to mention in the air because I thought it was awesome. He basically said, if no one has already coined the terms strintiger, struel, straight time, and stressimal, then let me be the first. So when I saw this, I knew exactly what he's talking about. And if you do any sort of like JSON parsing or basically just string parsing, and it's like one of those things where this is a string, but I know it's really an integer. I know it's really a Boolean. You're just kind of messing around that sort of parsing, and that's what we're talking about. This is a straight time column or a struel column. And
Well, you got some stroll coming down
that's
here.
right. So I thought that was really funny, and hope you guys enjoyed me saying silly words.
Yes, that was good. All right, so now I guess it's time to get into the meat of this thing, right? Which is going to be our behavioral patterns. So the first one we're going to talk about is the template pattern, which I think
Love this one.
Outlaw was mad at me that I took this
Oh,
one.
I was so upset.
Yeah, but
And we're talking about 3 patterns, right? We each kind of picked one.
yeah, we each picked one this time so that it didn't drag on and so it didn't overload you, so you can kind of soak this stuff
Oh,
in.
there's so many.
Yeah, there's a
behaviorals
lot.
to
I mean-
discuss.
Teens, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be back with more episodes on these type things. But so let's get into the template pattern. It's also referred to as the Hollywood principle, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So essentially, when you have a template pattern, you basically have an abstract class that has some implementation. Doesn't have to have a ton, but it basically has a main method that has the flow of things that are to be called. And in that main method, you're going to have method calls. So the example that they have on Wikipedia, and I'll stick with that so that if you're over there looking at this, you can follow it. You have a game abstract class. And essentially, they've got a method in there. And inside that method that you're called to run, they have initialize game call, a make move call, an is end of game, and then print winner. And so essentially what you've got now is you can subclass this abstract class and you can override any one of those methods, initialize game, make move, is end of game, print winner. And then when you do that, essentially what you're doing is the flow will always be exactly the same. So if you have a Monopoly game, then it's going to have its own initialized game that is going to set up your pieces, your money, and all that kind of stuff. Then make move. You're going to move across a board. You might be able to buy things, right? Is end of game. is everybody else out of money besides you? No, keep going. And then print winner if it's actually the end of the game. Now, then you might have another game, like maybe Sorry, where the initialized game is just set up pieces. But essentially what you're doing here is, again, the flow is always exactly the same. It's just that each step can be customized by the subclass. So that's all the template pattern is. It says, hey, just allow people, when they write these other classes, we know that they're going to have to adhere to these guidelines, but then let them do whatever they want within those called methods.
I love this pattern. I can give you a real world example
that
I've recently used for this. So, an example where I've used it is for sitemaps. So if you look at the sitemap spec, there's multiple types of sitemaps that you might have in the spec itself, but then for your own site, you might want to have sitemaps for different purposes. So maybe you have some sitemaps that are for products, some sitemaps that are for categories. You might have some sitemaps that are for, just other frivolous pages for the site. But then you might have a sitemap index file, yada, yada. And in those files, there's going to be some basic structure to each of them for like header and footer type information related to the XML. But then the real meat of it, right, might be different for each one. So in the example that I did was I had the base abstract class where it defined a pattern of, okay, it's now time to write the header. Now it's time to start writing the body. Now it's time to write the close part. And there was logic built into that base as well. So say like, because according to the sitemap spec, you can't have, there's a cap on the number of URLs and there's a cap on the size of the file. So it would also do checks to say like, all right, it's time to split this off to another file, things like that, right? But each one of these methods that was called in this base, this one method that had all these calls to the virtual methods, all of those methods could be either you accept the default of the base class, or you could provide your own implementation if your details were a little different, right?
Yep.
And so for the meat part of the sitemap, that one was that virtual method that had no implementation to it, because that was one that you had
to customize.
You had to override that one. But like the header and footer stuff, for the majority of the types, are going to be the same, right? Unless you're writing, the sitemap index versus the sitemap might be different, but the that one was going to be the one difference where the header might be different. It might have some different. I forget exactly what it was, but yeah. So that was a great example where like the specific class for writing the product specific sitemaps only had to implement its one part for the writing the meat of the sitemap, and the category one has its one little implementation, but they were all using as far as like the class or the call that actually went through all of them to write it. It only cared to know the one base type, and it didn't need to know anything about any of the other ones,
right?
Or that they even existed. It just
implement what you need.
Yeah.
It's pretty sweet. I mean, what it really forces you to do is to be consistent, right? Like, I mean, that's really the goal of that thing is, hey, you need a header, you need a body, you need a footer. This is going to be consistent. Every class that subclasses that thing is going to follow the same thing, because when you call that main method build sitemap, then all those things have to exist there.
Well, I mean, the way I would define the beauty of it is that you can have like a defined implementation for it, and if the caller needs to implement their single pieces of it, they can change the behavior for their specific need, but the overall structure, end to end, will still remain consistent. So
the flow is always there.
I love this pattern.
Yeah, that was a really cool one.
I love and I hate this pattern.
Really?
Yeah, so I love it and I end up using it all the time, and that's the problem. I end up abusing it. Like this pattern is responsible for killing every little game I tried to ever write. Because I'm like, wait a second, what if I wanted to make a different game? And then I abstract out the make move, create an interface here, and then I could have two games. And next thing you know, it's like 4 days later, and you're like, I don't even work on this anymore. It doesn't do anything. It's just a bunch of interfaces and abstract classes, and I don't care anymore. So this pattern is, it's like video game death for me.
Yeah, I can't say that I would hate it, but I will say that like I have often, because we just called this the template pattern, but I think more often than not, though, I've actually heard this one referred to as the template method pattern. Because it's more specific to, well, I mean, you guys are nodding your heads, or shaking your heads, but I make that distinction because it's not like a lot of patterns that you hear about are specific to a class, right? Like a singleton, for example,
Okay.
right, or a factory, right? Those are talking about particular classes, whereas this one is, more about like a method.
You're overriding methods within a method, pretty
Well,
much.
but the pattern though itself is that there's a method, and that method already has a bunch of calls to other methods, and the expectation is you will implement those other methods.
Override those other methods.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Override those other methods.
Override them if you need to. Otherwise, you'll accept whatever the default behavior is.
Okay, yeah. So template method pattern.
Actually, when we talked about the builder pattern in the last design patterns episode, we mentioned this kind of maze thing where we said, build door, build wall, build whatever. Really, if you're dealing with different classes and building an ice maze or a fire maze or a magic maze or whatever it was, then you're following the same kind of template where you're filling in these methods and you can swap out these builders and things should just kind of work.
Oh, yeah, and getting back to the Hollywood principle on top of that. The Hollywood principle is don't call us, we'll call you. So basically all that's saying is if you overrode the thing when you call that abstract class's, run game, for instance, then it's going to know based off whatever the overrides were, it's just going to call that subclass's overridden or overridden method. And that's the whole don't call us, we'll call you. So instead of
basically you're saying like the method that you implement, you never actually call
Correct.
yourself. The call to it happens in the base class.
Correct. So that abstract class, when you ran that main program, it's reaching out and calling. If it was overridden, it automatically calls your class. You're never doing it within your own stuff, and that's why they call it. Don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah.
Yep. And the reason that I don't know if I explained it very well when I call this video game death is like how many times I've started and I'm like, I'm going to make a roguelike, so I start doing that, and then I'm like, I'm going to make a roguelike engine. And I start doing that, and I'm like, really, this is just a turn-based engine. I could make Connect 4 as well as a roguelike. And at that point, I'm off the deep end. It's over.
I think you stepped into refactor hell.
Yeah,
he did.
That's a problem for me. I want to do it. I love it so much. I could refactor all day long, happily. Refactoring and writing unit tests.
So Independ really sucked away part of your
test-driven
life.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it's perfect.
Test-driven development just is an infinite amount of work for you because you keep refactoring.
Yeah, I'll starve to death if I do TDD.
Test, refactor,
Yeah.
refactor, test.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I mentioned an example where I've used this in the real world, but like where in the wild, can you think of like an example where this is used in say .NET?
Aspectacular.
Oh, I meant okay. Well, I'll take that. Sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking. We talked about the methods that Vlad had set up, and it was like step 1 was like set up, and I forget the actual names now. Step 2 was something there were like 7 steps.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he had 7 steps.
I even specifically called out the template method pattern during that.
That episode, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so we'll have a link to that episode if you guys want to check it out.
But yeah, that's one.
Okay, so I meant something like baked into .NET.
Well, why don't you tell us?
Oh. I thought okay.
Okay, you serving it up? Yeah, the page lifecycle in web forms pretty much. Is it
ASP
MVC,
page?
MVC has it too. Yeah. So yeah, the page lifecycle on .NET.
So maybe you implement a page load, maybe you don't.
Yep, and you can override it, and then those templates are those methods are set up there, and so you can do your page load, your on pre-error, there's like a ton of them, aren't there?
Yeah, data bind. There's so many of them.
Yeah, so that's an example built into .NET where the template pattern is provided for you, so that you can implement the pieces and have fun.
Yeah, another one is even like if you were going to create like PowerShell command lists, then you kind of inherit from this class and
nobody does that. Oh wait,
it happens. It's awesome, man. I know some awesome people that wrote some awesome commandlets, but it's a secret. So
the
world
society.
secretly runs on PowerShell.
I still have never fallen in love with it. I think because it's like learning a whole new language and yet another command shell.
Yeah,
it's powerful.
That's why it's called PowerShell.
Exactly.
Yeah. Joe is obviously a big fan of it. I don't know. Like maybe we should just devote an entire show to let Joe talk about his love affair for.
Yeah, we should.
Let you talk about JavaScript after all. It's
I
only
never.
fair.
No. I only get to talk about my love for JavaScript. We've never actually gone in deep on it, right? Maybe we need to.
But PowerShell is pretty cool.
So is JavaScript. Ask the Node people out there.
All right. Well, I feel like we've taken a tangent here.
We always do.
Well, I actually do have a lot
The
of love for
template pattern
JavaScript.
for our show has gone astray.
It did, yes. We actually have a template pattern, and it is failing right now.
We often devolve into bashing on JavaScript.
God.
Anyway, next up, I want to talk about the strategy pattern, which is actually pretty similar to the template pattern. I mean, these are behavioral patterns, so I guess that makes sense. Wikipedia said this is also known as the policy pattern, but I've never heard anyone call it the policy pattern.
I call it the policy pattern all the time.
Yeah? And you're not talking about security?
Oh, wait.
Well, maybe there's a connection there. I don't know. But basically the deal with the strategy pattern is you encapsulate an algorithm, or really a family of algorithms that are similar, do a similar type thing, into a class. So that each of these classes contains just the algorithm. And then you can pass that class, and you can change those classes around and maybe call class A one time, class B another, and it's going to run this similar algorithm. So it's just encapsulating a method. It's very single responsibility principally. But just encapsulate into a class, and then that's about it, really. There's nothing too fancy about it. The main deal is, though, that these classes do have to meet a common interface. So maybe they have like an execute method or something like that. And I know I always bring up ColorMine because it's my baby. But there's a bunch of comparisons that you can do that are all very similar. So it's basically you take two colors and maybe some additional parameters, and you call compare, and you're going to get some sort of number out. And it's very important that you always call the same method with the same arguments, compare, and you always get the same output back, decimal in this case. And there are additional parameters that you can set when you create the class, but that method call always have to have the same signature no matter what. So that's pretty cool. And also wanted to mention a couple examples in .NET. Now, the first one I've got written down here is not actually one that I was able to find kind of, like a de facto, like, here's an example of the strategy pattern, but it just kind of makes sense conceptually, so I wanted to mention it. But encryption, right? If you're doing some sort of encryption, you don't really think about doing that sort of stuff like inline in a function, or at least you shouldn't. You would be doing something like, creating a class, here's my encryption method, whether it's AES or RSA or PD, BKF, whatever it is. And then you would specify your keys and whatever additional information. And then at the end, you're going to call something like encrypt or decrypt. So you're setting these objects up differently, but at the end of the day, you're just calling encrypt or decrypt and, doing that sort of stuff. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. I was thinking like, at first for a moment there, I was thinking like, you know what? I don't know that I was thinking like, man, have I ever actually used this? Like, but I think when I started thinking through the examples for it, where I was thinking like, oh, okay, you know what? I bet I really am using this, and I never really considered it. Is when you made the comment about you're defining a common interface, and you're letting each one define its algorithm for that. So then that made me think of an example for like payment processors, right? So you might have different. Depending on the third-party processor, where there's credit card versus like a Google Wallet or a PayPal or whatever that might be, the actual implementation to process the payments would be different for each one, but the commonality is that interface that they're using. So that's the strategy, is that they're just using they're going to implement that interface, and so the caller only has to know about that interface.
Yeah, absolutely. And really the alternative there, if
I don't
you
know
didn't...
if I described that too well.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's something where at the end of the day, you're going to be calling payment capture or payment refund or something like that. There's a lot of setup that goes into those different things, but at the end of the day, you're following the same pattern. And one way to set this up would be to have a function called capture that's got a big switch statement that says if it's credit card, then do this. If it's another credit card processor, do that. But
that already
hopefully,
sounds painful.
Yeah, it's definitely painful. So another way to do that sort of thing would be to abstract those payment methods, and so that you can just add a different class that handles, pay with Amazon or pay with whatever.
I guess the real point that I was trying to make here, though, is that like initially when we were looking at this and like even before when we were putting the show notes together and like, or even back up even before that when we had picked like what patterns are we each going to discuss for tonight's show, and when you picked strategy pattern, initially I was like, I don't know that I've ever used that in on my own, but it turns out like if I really start to think about it, I think this is one of those patterns where you probably do use it and you've never thought about it.
Oh, absolutely. Here, I can blow your mind right now.
Oh my God.
Order by.
Mind blown.
Yep. All these link expressions that take a lambda, the lambda is literally you're passing a function that does something. You're kind of encapsulating some sort of logic.
That's exactly what that is, yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying order by, x arrow x dot something. You're defining this functionality that meets an interface. It's either that func or the action and link
that
almost
makes like just anonymous functions almost apply.
It's very similar, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit loosey-goosey because they're not actually extracted to a class, but that's one of those things where this strategy pattern was kind of written about before lambdas and, I guess
I think
anonymous
the payment
functions
processor window definitely
list.
seems straightforward. Like, you need a method to be able to capture payment. You need a method to be able to authorize payment, things like that would be defined in your interface. And then each class for a specific, like a Google Wallet, for example, or a PayPal, they're implementing that interface. And by doing that, whether you realize it or not, they're following the strategy pattern.
It's weird, though, because it sounds like just fundamental OO, like polymorphism type stuff, right? Like,
yep.
It looks like the real... So I'm looking at something on dofactory.com where they have a .NET version of the strategy design pattern. And it seems like just basic OO type development, and it seems like on top of this, if you use something like a factory with it, it would make it extremely powerful.
Yep. And really, if you're following the single responsibility principle, then you're doing this all the time because you've got this thing that it does one thing and one thing only. And, if you're talking about it at that point, you're talking about an algorithm.
The key is you're making the algorithm interchangeable. Like you're abstracting that away from, there's no one implementation for it, and the client doesn't have to care about that implementation.
Yep.
Right.
So that kind of brings me to the third thing. I was kind of thinking of like examples in the .NET world, and this is it's definitely straying from the pattern, the definition in Wikipedia. But I thought it was interesting to bring up is dependency injection. Isn't that kind of what we're doing with dependency injection? I've got some classes that meet an interface.
Well, you mean the actual tool that's doing the injection?
Well, not so much the tool, and that's where the example kind of breaks down. Is it's not really the tool that does it, but it's the same kind of concept where I've got different classes that meet an interface, and they each have their own algorithm or algorithms, and then I configure them to use this one or that one at runtime, or maybe even compile time. But it's the same kind of thing where I've got this algorithm or set of algorithms, and I'm choosing to use this one over that one. And so what it means is I've abstracted my algorithms out, and I'm interchanging them. So it's definitely a loose definition, but I just thought it's kind of an interesting take on this strategy pattern.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that's weird about the if you only looked at the definition of this one, though, it says it defines a family of algorithms, right?
Right.
But then you think well, are you defining the algorithm just the method name? Because...
Well, here's an example we talked about a little bit before the show is log4net. So I might have a file appender that appends to the end of the file. I might have a rolling file appender that knows how to roll the files, or I might have a database appender that appends to database. And each one of these is configured basically, in your web or app config file. It's kind of doing a sort of dependency injection, but at the same time, you're really... These classes that are underlying are meeting this sort of interface. They make up a family of algorithms that all do something very similar, and at the end of the day, they just kind of call log.write, and the stuff happens underneath because they meet the same interface. So I would say that's a pretty good example of the strategy pattern.
Yeah. So, let me say this if we haven't already said it. Please leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or, Stitcher is awesome. We're getting some really good traction there. But, I'll tell you what, wherever you feel the most comfortable leaving us that review, you can go to one of Alan's videos on YouTube and leave it there. Whatever. Just, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I know that you guys, a lot of you aren't writing reviews because we've gotten too many good ones. So I know that we're getting some sort of...
we still want to keep the good ones rolling in.
I don't know where you're going with this, Joe, but I don't like it.
The good ones are good, but you can also email us at comments@codingblocks.net if you want to send us something a little bit more harsh.
Yeah, so let take this note down, okay? Put the good ones up on iTunes and Stitcher, and any kind of rants, email those to us.
And we'll fix it, maybe. I mean, we'll at least read it.
Well, we'll probably blame Alan first.
Right, fair. Yeah. But, I mean, some of the other ones that we got, too, that we didn't mention earlier, from Chris Tessin. I'm not certain. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too bad. Great podcast and very entertaining. Tessin.
That's my guess.
Yeah, that's what I thought initially. Speedy Surfer, great way to learn and drive. That's what our goal was, right?
And he's speedy, so I mean, you got to take that.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's driving while he's doing this, and he's speedy.
Decepted or Dected is amazing work, guys. And 603, smart and enjoyable. So, I mean, that's what we were going for, anyways. Is like we said, we wanted you guys to be able to learn on the fly while you're driving, cutting your grass, whatever. So, yeah, please do leave us a review. And leave us some feedback. We'd really appreciate it. And also share this with your friends or coworkers. I mean, if you've got people that you want to improve their code.
And like we've said, like this does help other people to find us as well. So we greatly appreciate that.
Yeah. So
thank you for everyone who has already sent us a review on iTunes and Stitcher. Just know that we really do appreciate it. And thank you.
Seriously.
So the next pattern. I love this one. This is. I don't know if you guys like this one as much as I do, but I do.
This is an elegant one.
The null object pattern. Ah, that little guy. So here was this interesting quote that I found, and it said, "I call it my $1 billion mistake. It was the invention of the null reference in 1965. At that time, I was designing the first comprehensive type system for references in an object-oriented language. My goal was to ensure that all use of references should be absolutely safe, with checking performed automatically by the compiler. But I couldn't resist the temptation to put in a null reference, simply because it was so easy to implement. This has led to innumerable errors, vulnerabilities, and system crashes, which has probably caused $1 billion of pain and damage in the last 40 years.
Wow, it's a little hard on himself, huh? That's Sir Charles Anthony Richard Hoare.
Yeah, he's a principal researcher at Microsoft, inventor of Quicksort, numerous awards. You can go check him out on Wikipedia, and we will have a link to him in the show notes as well. But, when we talk about the null object pattern, I think it's only fair that we pay homage to, the null reference guy.
Yeah, and he also invented Quicksort, by the way, so kind of a big deal.
Yeah, cut him some slack. Cut him some slack.
I mean, he did invent null. All right, so null object pattern. So what is this first, right? This is if you want to provide a safe implementation that does nothing, this is what you do. All right. So when to use this is when you want to abstract null away from the client. You don't want your callers to have to bother with checking for null. You just want to allow them the freedom and flexibility to know that they can call your method, whatever that might be, and they're going to get back something. And it'll always be safe, and they can just call methods on it, and it'll work without a problem. All right?
That's something useful. So I get an object back, and I just say object.whatever, and if it's a null object, then it just kind of no-ops. It does nothing, right? Nothing harmful happens. My system doesn't crash because I didn't check for null.
Right. So an example of it, a very, I might even say that this is kind of a loose example of it. But let's say that if you had a method and that method was supposed to return a list, okay, but based on some condition, maybe you don't return a list of anything, right? But at least you return back an empty list. And then that way, the caller could just automatically throw that into a for each loop, for example, and try to iterate on it. But because your method didn't return anything, nothing happened.
Yeah, no harm, right? No foul.
Exactly.
You're not having to say, hey, if this is null, if this is not null, then do the for each. If it is null, skip it. None of that garbage. That's basically what you're avoiding.
Yeah, so like some places where I've used this myself is in factory classes, right? Where I need to create something, and maybe based on some condition or whatever that's met, I don't want to return back null, but I want to return back a safe object that they can use, right? So I will return back a null object pattern version of it.
Okay. So trying to wrap my head around this, I'm trying to think like the
I
only
feel
example.
like you guys are just like, never mind, forget it. Go on.
Yeah.
You're like lost in null while I'm talking about null. You're losing. My love of null here is gone straight to dev null.
You threw so many nulls in there.
No, we actually tried really hard to find an example of this in the .NET framework, and I can't think of any. And we had a hard time searching for any. But it's still, I'm sure it's something that's out there in frameworks. I know I've certainly done stuff like it. But one thing that's kind of weird about it is that it almost like leads you to feel safe when maybe you shouldn't. Like if you're kind of trusting this method to return you an object that does nothing rather than null, then, do you think it kind of tricks you into not checking for null on other calls in that same method?
You're getting ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, well, dang. So I didn't want to get into that yet. Okay, fine. So we will. So I was going to close on like a question of the day, right? So name the pattern that I really like that often goes hand in hand with the null object pattern.
The Singleton.
Oh, no.
Yeah, my boy Singleton.
You sprung that on me.
Woo, Singleton. He's back. Living large. Woo, raise the roof.
That's if you like pathological liars.
What? No, this is a great use for the Singleton pattern, right? All right, so the bonus question: why? Why would the Singleton go hand in hand? Not all the time, but often.
Well, I don't have to worry about it being initialized or ever not exist. I just kind of call it. I don't have to think about it.
No, you got any ideas there, Alan? Okay.
Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Dun-dum-dun-dum-dun-dum.
Okay, so there's two reasons why often the null pattern is in conjunction with the Singleton pattern, and that is because there's not really going to be any state. If you had two versions of the null object, they're going to be identical, right? So if they're both identical, why waste memory to have the same nothingness repeated, right? So let me give you an example.
Okay.
We talked about payment processors a minute ago for like Google Wallet and PayPal, right? So you have a Google Wallet processor, you have a payment processor. They both implement capture methods and auth methods, but let's say, I don't know why, but you have a null payment processor, and you're reserving some space to have these empty methods that aren't doing anything. But why would you need to do that twice? You wouldn't.
You wouldn't want to instantiate that, right?
Right. So because there's no state to the null object, there's no need to repeat it. Now, number two reason is for equality checks, right? If I return back null, if I return back the null object version back to you, and you want to check as you jumped ahead to see, hey, is this the quote null, right? Then you need to be able to have something to compare it to, and it needs to be the same thing in order for it to pass the reference equality check, right? Because if you had two instances of the same object, those wouldn't pass because they would technically be pointing to different
right.
memory
And presumably,
blocks.
I might want to know why, or if I got the null object or the no op object, right?
Right. So that's why I say, like, it doesn't. You don't have to necessarily implement the Singleton pattern when you do the null object, because maybe the state or the equality checks aren't something that you need at that time. But there's a lot
for
of
what
times
you
where
talked
go.
about, yeah, that makes sense. If you're doing something like you were talking about where you call, I don't know, let's say that you have a method that says, get your customers out of the database. Like a null object pattern might be you pass in bad garbage. for doing the search. And so it just returns you an empty list of customers, right? So then you wouldn't want to use something like a singleton because you actually are getting new objects back, but you could return a null or an empty list.
Right. So the idea here is that you're just doing it for safety. Now, here's the benefits, though. This is why like the null object pattern is so awesome, right? Because it cleans up your code, man. You're getting rid of all of these null checks. You don't care. No if else required, right? You don't have to say like, if this is null, do this, else do that. Mm-hmm. You don't care. You just know you got back something. You can safely call something on it. But like I said, if you did want to check to see if this is the specifically the null object, you still have that option, but you don't have to. Right? So that's the beauty of it.
Okay. So like what I was trying to think of like an example, kind of in my own mind what this might look like. And I was thinking if we wanted to say like you got some sort of, URL parameter and it says, delete user 14. So what I might do is maybe say get user 14, then user.delete. And in this case, if there was no user 14, because maybe I refreshed the page, I already deleted them, I would get a crash. But if I use the null object pattern, then I would kind of get this null object back. When I say give me user 14, it gives me an empty object. I say object.delete, and it just kind of does nothing. But I didn't have to do this extra checking or worry about this stuff, and it was just kind of handled by doing nothing in the null object.
It's almost like because we've talked about my hatred for this one method in LINQ, which is like the first versus first or default.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder, like, I don't know, I gotta go back to remembering the first or default. How that works, because maybe that would be the safe version.
It returns the default value
because null
for...
would return back, the first would return back null.
Yeah, so all reference types return null, but like an integer would return 0.
Right, but yeah, for the first or default, you're saying. So maybe that is an example of the null object pattern within the .NET framework.
That's what it seems like.
Well, it would actually return null though, so I would think not.
Yeah, you are
for
right.
Reference types,
depending on what the type's supposed to be. All right, well, so our search for the null object pattern inside of the .NET framework continues. But here's another beauty of why this pattern is so its simplicity is its beauty. Okay? Because your need for doing these if conditions is lowered, right? You lower the complexity of your code, right?
Absolutely.
Remember our conversation about independ?
Yeah.
All right? Mm-hmm. Your cyclomatic complexity score just drops.
Yep.
Right? That's awesome. Right? I love this guy. You don't care what was returned. You just get to do stuff. You get to live up to Nike's motto and just do it.
So if you imagine a world without null references, like if null references weren't allowed, we'd be writing a whole lot more objects, first of all.
Yeah.
But that's interesting what the code will look like. I guess you would probably end up doing a lot of checking to see if it equaled the null object and then throwing an error or something like that.
The downside to this is you are creating objects for the sake of having objects. So basically things that really do nothing. So you're taking up heap space, but it's probably, there's always trade-offs,
well, it
right?
depends. Like in my singleton example, though, you are limiting that.
You're limiting it.
But the beauty of it is, like I said in the beginning, you're abstracting null away from your caller. Your caller doesn't have to be aware.
And there's
of it.
that trade-off, I think, is a fair one. You always have the performance versus whatever, but there's a lot to be said for clean code, right? Like being able to go in and read something and not get exceptions that you're worried about and all that.
Let's not even think about this in the scenario that you're actually writing a class to represent the null, the quote null object that maybe a factory would return, because that's certainly an example of this pattern. But let's just say in the example that I gave in the beginning where, you have some method, it needs to return back a list of some type, right? Instead of returning back null, you return back just an empty list.
Which is still taking up some space on the heap, but
but
not
it
much.
Makes it much safer.
Right. Safer.
Like any time that you cannot return back a null,
yep.
you make your methods much safer for your callers.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually like this pattern a lot, and it's something that I think I did long before I even knew it was a pattern, right? I think probably a lot of us have, because you're like, man, I'm so tired of checking for null, right? So this is a very, very useful pattern.
Yeah, I love that guy. Null pattern, null object pattern, and singleton, they're like, peanut butter and chocolate, and they go together so well.
So it does seem like it fits really nicely with the strategy pattern.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and even
yeah.
the template pattern. If you're doing your ice maze, and one of the things like maybe create fire or some sort of method on there, it just wouldn't happen in the ice maze. So, well, that's really at the method level. So I guess I'm getting a little wrong there, but still kind of wrap my head around this one.
Yeah, I mean it's also you use this too when you're implementing the command pattern, which is another behavioral pattern that we haven't gotten into yet, which we'll get to in the future. But that's when command objects that encapsulate an action and its parameters, and then it's so. You could also, you mentioned the strategy pattern. You could also consider this to be a special case of the strategy pattern or even the command pattern.
Oh, I was just thinking like an example of this might be like if you've ever been programming something and like you didn't configure it correctly, and rather than an exception being thrown, just nothing kind of happened. The whatever you expected to see on the screen didn't show up because it kind of got no-opt, and that's one of those situations where it can be kind of frustrating. And you're like, what the heck just happened? There's nothing logged because there was no error. But it's also good for something that you want to be highly available or whatever. It's almost like interesting for default behaviors.
Yeah, it's also sometimes considered a special case for the state pattern, which is another in the long list of behavioral patterns.
Oh, so it would be like my blank state.
Yeah, it's a clean way for an object to partially change its type at runtime. So So we've already given like some hints into some future behavioral patterns that we'll get into. But yeah, if you haven't already tried the null object pattern, I suggest you try it and fall in love with it because it is awesome. And then any hatred that you might have had for Singleton, you're gonna be like, you know what? Michael was right. Singleton ain't so bad after all.
It ain't so good either.
What? Crazy.
Let's see what Google thinks. Singletons.
Oh God, here we go.
It's going to be anti-pattern, right?
Are bad, pathological liars, evil, closed, and open.
Poor Singleton.
Oh, Google.
Poor Singleton.
Yes. All right, so let's get on to the resources we like. What do we got over there?
Yeah, so I mean we've mentioned some of these before, but I felt that it was a good one to bring back up is the design patterns library on Pluralsight. Oh my God, there must be like 15, 20, 25, 30.
There's a lot.
I think like everyone who ever wrote any code for Pluralsight is in that library. It is a massive set of videos that you can watch and learn, and there's really a lot of great content in it, so I highly recommend it.
Yep.
We'll include a link to that in the show notes as well.
Yep, and also, of course, the Design Patterns book, which actually doesn't have null object. That's kind of a newer one. But this book is awesome, and I think we mentioned last time, it's still in its first edition because that's just how right it was.
Yeah, that's pretty...
That's still unbelievable.
Outstanding.
And did I mention that it has 2 bookmarks built into the book?
Yeah, you really need like 80,000 bookmarks for it.
Yeah. My cats have chewed these bookmarks a little bit. I'm actually holding the book right now.
Don't even bother with a highlighter for that book because the entire book will be yellow.
Yeah, seriously. All right, and so then now on to our tips of the week. Joe, what's yours?
All right, mine is the MS Dev Show. The Swedish coder, who I think his Twitter handle, it's Patrick Dahlin. We've mentioned before as
several times.
Swedish coder. He turned me on to the MS Dev Show, which is really fantastic. It's one guy who works at Microsoft and another MVP, and they just do these really great interviews, and they always have tons of tips. I feel like I'm always scrambling for a pen or going to the website to look up something, but
it's really great content.
It's really good, and the topics are really good. It's not the kind of standard podcasty interviews you hear. Like they just did one with the guy who's kind of running the Azure search team, and they just talked about it was like just the right mix of like details and kind of high level to just make it really interesting.
The name almost sounds misleading though, because like it's called the MS Dev Show, so immediately you would think like, oh well, I'm not I do Java, so why would I even bother? But like one of the last episodes that I listened to, it was just on how Agile was used inside of Microsoft.
That was a really good one.
That was fantastic.
It was an excellent episode.
It was not in any way specific to any Microsoft technology, but it was great.
Yeah,
I mean they talked about it how Microsoft was using it to make Microsoft technologies, but.
Yeah. And I got to say, on top of it, another thing, and we are all avid podcast listeners. the sound quality is fantastic. So it never distracts from the content of the show. So kudos to them on that. And the content is really outstanding.
It doesn't hurt that you can hear.
Yeah. Well, if you listen to, I know you do podcasts at 2 times speed, and I do 1.5. So sound quality's bad. It just sounds like a modem.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Dude, I don't even know how you do 2. That's insane.
Man, you gotta listen to everything at double speed. Ain't nobody got time for that.
So yeah, what was your tip totally?
Just MS Dev Show. You can find them by going to iTunes or Stitcher, or on Twitter. They're just MS Dev Show.
Wait, I thought you had an.
Oh no, yeah, I got the mother of all.
Oh, that was you. My bad. My bad.
Yeah, bring it.
Hey, Outlaw's got like 5 pages for his tip here.
All right, so put me on double speed. Here it comes. Nah, you'll want to listen to this on single speed. Who are we kidding? All right, so this is an NTT framework one, and maybe you've already ran into this, but if you haven't, then you'll appreciate this. So here's the scenario. You want to return an iQueryable for some table, right? But that table has foreign key relationships, right? So what you don't want to have to do is loop through the results of that iQueryable, right, and perform, n number of queries for each of those foreign key references, right? So, the example that I wrote here was, let's consider that you have a product table, and for each product, you might have multiple SKUs for it. So, let's picture the product is some shirt design, and you have SKUs that represent blue, red, white color versions of that shirt, as well as small, medium, large versions of that shirt. And you want to go through. You want to query that product table, but you need to be able to access those product SKUs as well, right? So here's how you can do that. In your iQueryable, there is a .include method that you can use. And in that method, you can specify what key you want to include in that. So now, depending on that query, your payload might be rather large, so be aware, right? But if you can take the hit for that large result set, that might be way better trade-off than doing n number of queries, at least a minimum of n number of queries, or getting back n number of results for n number of queries. So that depends on what your need is. But then let's say you're like, well, I need there's multiple foreign keys and I want them to all come back. You can chain these .includes together. So you could get .include, and then in the product example, let's say that I was going to set up a Lambda and just call it P. So P goes to P dot, the first foreign key table, and then .include P goes to P dot second foreign key table, right? And this is going to use eager loading, so you are going to take the hit on that. But again, you now have one result set that came back, and your foreign keys are there as well.
So this is similar, if we're talking about link to SQL here, which I think we are. This is similar to doing like a select all from table 1, join table 2, join table 3.
But you're not having to go back to your crazy join syntax. You're doing this in entity.
But it's the equivalent. So if you're talking about
an entity,
so if you're talking about SQL, that's basically what it's generating behind the scenes. When you do that dot include, it's basically a select all. So
I still can't get join syntax, even in the SQL query syntax. I have to look it up every time. So this is something I can actually remember.
Yeah, because okay, so I guess one thing that I didn't mention that if you weren't aware of is that if you did your select from the product table, right, and then you tried to do anything on that foreign key reference, so you got back your first product result and you did product dot, and you called that second, you called that foreign key table. So in the example of the SKU, so you did product dot SKU dot. That's going to, in the background, that would normally kick off a query if it hadn't already, if it didn't already have that data, right? So it would kick off a query normally. So if you did a query that returned back 10 products, and for each of those 10 products you did product.sku, that's going to be the one query to get all the products, and then 10 more queries to get all those SKUs, and maybe those SKUs only return back, one record. They might return back, more than one record, but the point is that in this scenario you had to The point is that this would return back everything at one time for you in one query call.
Yeah, so you're not just constantly going back and forth to your database or whatever your data provider is.
And it looks nice in the queries, the Lambda syntax.
Yeah, it is pretty. All right, so my tip of the week. So if you've ever had a need where you had a table, and let's say you needed to populate a temporary table or something, and let's say that this table you've got has 50 columns in it, and you're like, God, I really don't want to create this temporary table and define the columns with the varchars and the ints and all that. A real quick way of just creating a shell of a table in SQL Server would be do a select star into, and if it's a temp table, you say pound new table name from the source table name where 1 equals 0. So the beauty behind this is a select into creates a new table. When you say where 1 equals 0, that doesn't say I don't want anything to happen. It says I still want you to create this table, but I don't want any rows in it. So this is how you can literally go about creating a shell of a table. Select star into new table from old table where 1 equals 0. And you get a shell of a table that you can populate with whatever you want.
That's one shell of a table.
Nice. That reminds me, SQL Chris, who we've mentioned on the show before, but he does a lot of kind of SQL tips and questions and all sorts of cool stuff. But he recently put out a survey. We'll have a link. So if you have any sort of SQL questions or stuff you'd like to see out of him, then he's got that link. But what actually got me thinking about it is, I took the survey, and one of the things he asked is, what do you have a hard time with in SQL? And I was like, importing and exporting data. I know I shouldn't. It seems like something that should be really easy for a database, but every time it comes to like import data from, an Excel spreadsheet, or you want to move some data or some tables from one database to the other, and you got to make sure to check the schema only or data and schema, and oh my gosh, you forgot the foreign keys, and it's such a pain, or you can do the whole backup and restore thing, but even that gets kind of nasty, and like restore doesn't work half the time for some reason. You got to like stop the database and do weird stuff, and I don't know. I just moving data around is not my forte. Like I can query once it's there, but getting the data into the right database it's kind of a pain. So that's a cool tip there, Alan.
Cool. Glad I helped somebody.
All right. So just in summary, we've talked about the template method pattern, the strategy pattern, the null logic pattern.
And the Singleton pattern.
Oh, my God. I love that guy. So be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app.
And make sure to give us that review. We love it, and we appreciate what you guys have been doing, and we'll certainly take more.
Yep, and visit us at codingblocks.net, where you can find our show notes, examples, discussions, and more.
And send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net.
Why are you pointing at me?
I figured we all went out of order except for you, so I figured it was your turn to say my line.
Oh, you mean be sure to follow us on Twitter at CodingBlocks?
Wait, hold on. No, yeah, that one.
Contact us with a question or a topic. Leave your name and preferred method of shout out, website, Twitter, etc. And we'll mention you in a podcast, a review. I feel like a robot reading this stuff.
Yeah, that's really good.
Wah, 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 wah.
All right, I guess that means we're about done.
Yep. All right, so we'll be back soon.
Denim.
See, it's stuck in your head now. That's awesome.